What is up, sports fans? What is up, Mariners fans? Let's get right into the news that everyone's talking about. Longtime beloved outfielder for the Mariners, Mitch Haniger, has been released by the team. The shocking news coming down over the weekend, and I mean shocking. Like, this is a guy that had $15.5 million left on his contract for this year, and once again, a team that we've been talking about over and over again that's notoriously cheap if you've been listening to Bleav In Mariners, something that myself and a lot of other fans have been contentious about. It's a move that is pretty shocking from a team that has acted like this all through the offseason, just cheap, hanging on to every dollar that they can, not willing to spend any other dollars that they actually could because they've had a lot, regardless of the rumors that you've heard about like Root Sports hamstringing them. I mean, come on, John Stanton's just playing poor, right? But a shocking move nonetheless, and one I'm actually impressed with, but I would say that Mariners fans do know that it needed to happen, but are still sad about. But we got to talk about how it affects the roster and what the Mariners are going to do going into the 2025 season without one beloved Mitch Haniger. Welcome on into the latest episode of Bleav In Mariners. I'm Jordon Schultz, more affectionately known as Schultzy, based out of Portland, Oregon. I'm a Pacific Northwest talk show host, working normally on Sports Radio 1080 The Fan. Love to do this Mariners podcast just because I am a diehard Mariners fan. I have bled the teal ever since I was a kid. And I because of that, I understand, connections to players that you really like, that maybe you thought were going to have more success. And frankly, Mitch Haniger did have a level of success here in Seattle. We can argue whether or not he was a good or a great player. We're trying to answer that here as we look at stats and maybe some players that he's compared to. I love to go to Baseball Reference for that when everybody argues about what kind of player somebody is. Baseball Reference, because of WAR, because of UZR, because of all these different weird statistics that, I don't even know everything about, but that essentially have made it a lot easier to figure out how great of a fielder a player is, how good at the dish he actually is beyond batting average. There's really great ways now to see, how hard the balls that you hit that get into play or not affect your batting average. There's all kinds of different things, like where you're hitting it into the field, where in the strike zone you usually see it. Like, there's just all kinds of information now that you can go off of to compare guys. And that's what I like to do when people have this, is he a good or a great player debate about Mitch Haniger. And I want to look at Baseball Reference, and I think you'd be interested to see a couple of the players that he is compared to, not only just hitter-wise in general, but then through the age of 33, 34, where Mitch Haniger's looking and what we've seen him do on the field compared with those guys through their age 33, 34 season. So we'll look at that as well. But really, I mean, this is kind of a time. Mitch Haniger, of course, once again, coming to the Mariners, in that trade with the Arizona Diamondbacks as somewhat of a young pup, excited for the Mariners. At least Jerry Dipoto at the time said that they were going to inject some power into their lineup. Haniger was just a young, great professional hitter and became a significant part of Mariners history. And President Jerry Dipoto said that in the announcement when they did say that they were releasing him. Haniger was at times one of the best Mariners on the field, right? The all-time franchise leader, I believe it's 8 walk-off hits, and you can't, you just can't replace those, like, in the moment, in the backyard. Like, as a kid, you're in that situation, bottom of the ninth, and Mitch Haniger literally was successful at that 8 times for your Seattle Mariners. Super nice to see that over and over again, and really continued to not only endear himself to the fans on the field, but was a great person off the field too. So, there's got to be something said about Mitch Haniger just being a great person, being a great clubhouse leader. J.P. Crawford talking about the Mariners releasing him, really highlighting what a tremendous teammate he was here. Looking at this quote, joined the Mariners in 2019, of course, as the article says. He's cared more about the guys in here and what we do on and off the field than anybody I've ever seen. He's the kind of big brother to me ever since I came in and took me under his wing, and he means a lot to the history of the organization for sure. He left everything on the table. Absolutely. And JP mentions he was an all-star, which, you know what, Mitch Haniger, dang, he not only played super well, but helped the Mariners get back to the playoffs. His all-star season didn't come during that playoff season, but in 2018, he hit his booty off, 11th in MVP voting, and hit 26 home runs with 93 RBIs, 285 batting average, 170 hits, his career high in hits that year, and his career high in WAR, 6.5, played almost 162 games. But that and his 2021 season were really the best seasons. 39 home runs, 100 RBIs, had a nice number of hits, 157 as well, walked a lot. But then, of course, in 2022, not as successful, at least for him personally, but did help the Mariners get to the playoffs. He just started, unfortunately, breaking down again. 11 home runs, 34 RBIs. Obviously, earlier in his career, he had the ball off of his, you know what. I mean, there were just multiple, I would say, hard luck injuries for Mitch Haniger throughout his career. And at that point, essentially getting his free agent deal with the San Francisco Giants because the Mariners didn't really want to pay anybody at that point, even if it was a fan favorite. But then after the Robbie Ray deal, trading back for him, 12 home runs, 44 RBIs last season. I mean, he started off really well, had a great spring training, 385, I think, 400 batting average in spring training, played well going into April, but his body just broke down once again, and he was supposed to be back healthy, but his body breaking down here in spring training with that shoulder soreness, essentially. I think it was like March 7th or 8th that he was originally sidelined with that, and hasn't been able to swing a bat. Essentially, that has been making it worse. It just started off as shoulder soreness, and it's getting worse. That's not really good for an aging outfielder and one that is taking up a lot of your payroll. But the Mariners, essentially, because of that injury, I wouldn't say they were pushed into a hard situation. If anything, I would say it was probably easier for them to make the call of being the smart team at this point, which they were, just kind of cutting bait from him and not being the cheap team and hanging on just because he's been making so much money and hoping, oh, maybe we can get that production out of him. But I'm not trying to knock on Mitch personally. Really sad to see him go from the Mariners. Loved watching him. I mean, he really was the bright spot, especially, in those late 2020 seasons, or excuse me, late 2010 seasons into the 2020-21 season after he came back from COVID, and was part of that team that helped the Mariners get back to the playoffs. So we've got to acknowledge all that. So yeah, sad to see him go. He provided some huge moments for the team. And I'm always going to love anybody that helps, get the franchise back to the playoffs in 2022. And I'm sure that we're going to see him at all kinds of classic days coming up here, old timers days coming up, like here in 20, 30 years for the Mariners, highlighting that return to the playoffs in 2022. Hopefully there'll be more success to lean on since then. But like that team that got the guys back to the playoffs, Mitch Haniger will always be a part of that. And we can acknowledge all the positives. Mitch really was a great player in Seattle. And once again, I'm going to use this word, a beloved player in Seattle. But this move, unfortunately, in my opinion, represents a major misstep by Jerry Dipoto. Of course, M's were hamstrung salary-wise the last, 2-3 seasons or so because of reportedly dealing with, problems at Root Sports or whatever you want to blame it on. But essentially, after saying that they were going to have money to spend on free agents right around these last couple of years, what did Jerry Dipoto say? Late 20-teens, I think maybe 2021, 22, said, we're positioning ourselves where we will be able to sign these generational talent level free agents, and unfortunately never did. And because of that, last January, they were forced to send Robbie Ray, who was recovering from Tommy John surgery. I get it. He was dead money for the Mariners at the time. They also sent Anthony DeScalfani and $6 million in cash just to make the deal happen to the Giants for Mitch Haniger, trying to get a fan favorite back, but also Jerry Dipoto hoping he could turn dead money into some offense for Seattle. And I'm not sure many Mariners fans could beleaguer him at that point. He's doing something that, so many fans, I think, would probably do themselves if they were sitting in that seat, just, grabbing back for that former player. I get that tug on the heartstrings is probably going to sell some tickets. So everybody wins. The baseball ops wins and the business ops side wins. I get that it's a win all around for the organization when you look at just bringing back a fan favorite. But if that fan favorite doesn't hit, unfortunately, it proves to be a major misstep. And that is exactly what happened here with Jerry Dipoto and the Seattle Mariners. Once again, Robbie Ray now making 26 million bucks for 2025 and 2026. So for the next 2 seasons, he's guaranteed around $50 million. The Mariners were trying to get out of that salary, but now Robbie Ray, back from Tommy John, had a few successful starts last year for the Giants, came back, looked pretty competent. He is still a former Cy Young Award winner, and I think a lot of teams in Major League Baseball, maybe the Yankees after they just suffered a couple of injuries with Luis Heel, and with their ace and Garrett Cole, maybe they would want a cheaper $25 million former Cy Young Award winning pitcher on their staff through a trade. Like, you think that there are other teams out there that might have seen that as an attractive piece? Maybe come the deadline, Robbie Ray pitching well. I understand that the Mariners already have 5-6 young great pitchers, or 5 young pitchers in Luis Castillo. But imagine if, and Mitch Haniger was still just dead money last year because he didn't really hit well past May? I mean, definitely hit well in April, but then going into May just really started to teeter off. And he even told the Seattle Times, I think it was an interview that he did with Ryan Divish earlier in spring training, essentially saying, coming back last season, I just wasn't healthy. I was still recovering, trying to get my back feeling right. And I was rushing back into things and didn't actually feel 100%. He was hitting well, but essentially lost any kind of hitting ability once his health went away. And you saw that kind of just teeter off throughout the year. And that essentially $15.5 million turned into dead money. And the move was pretty awful. And I know hindsight's 2020 here, but I just think this is such a major misstep by Jerry Dipoto, because instead of having $15.5 million in dead money this year that you just released, you could have had a starting pitcher that probably could have gotten you something on the trade market. The open market was asking for starting pitching this offseason. The Mariners checked in on trying to deal Luis Castillo because, I personally really don't like that they didn't do this deal. I would have done it in a heartbeat if I were them, because they didn't want to take on Yoshida's contract, which I think is around $20+ million, as well as a very young, very good hitter in Tristan Casas. They could have gotten them for Luis Castillo, but they said no. I cannot believe that they turned that deal down, but unfortunately, they said no. And that, I think, is representative, not necessarily like maybe one good player and one okay player that's kind of overpaid on one team. But I think Robbie Ray could have represented a trade piece that could have got you maybe a bat back, like something more than just dead money coming into 2025. And it was a very short-sighted move by Jerry Dipoto not to just wait a little bit. I understand that they were trying to do something with the money, and that John Stanton was kind of making Jerry Dipoto, try to make lemonade out of lemons, try to spin gold out of rocks, basically, if you will. But there really were better options in the future. Maybe if you looked forward, a great former Cy Young award-winning pitcher at $25 million a year has value on the market. They were able to trade him when he was injured. I think that speaks to the point that I'm making right now. He had value. And I understand that the rotation was set. I understand when they traded him, Robbie Ray was obviously coming back from from Tommy John surgery, but you can't just give up on a former Cy Young Award winner like that. I know he was the guy that gave it up for the Mariners in the playoffs against the Blue Jays. Trust me, I remember that very well. I actually injured myself jumping up and down in frustration when Jordon Alvarez hit that walk-off home run against the Mariners off of Robbie Ray, just leaving that pitch over the middle. Seriously, tore my calf. You can ask my wife. It happened. It's embarrassing. I was definitely mad at Robbie Ray for a long time. But this move, when you look back on it, and once again, hindsight's 2020, it just looks so short-sighted by the Seattle Mariners, because the Giants essentially now have somebody that is either going to play with them and affect their rotation most likely in a positive way, or could have gotten something on the open market if they were interested in dealing him. And that could have been something that the Mariners really, really could have used at this point. I know that everybody's excited about Rowdy Tellez coming in. And by the way, as we talk about here near the end of this episode of Bleav in Mariners, what the roster looks like now, and essentially with that release of Mitch Haniger, Rowdy Tellez guaranteed a roster spot. It's nice that they've got him. It's nice that, this non-roster invitee that Mariners fans really didn't know about or weren't really talking about before spring training started is going to be in the starting lineup and hopefully repeating a Mike Ford type season or a Daniel Vogelback type season for the Mariners. That's really all they need from him. But this is just a move that I thought should have been done, maybe last August, maybe November in the offseason, when you were really trying to figure out, like, okay, what at-bats did we waste last year? What at-bats can we try to turn into positives? And I know that Jerry Dipoto is kind of hoping that everybody rebounds. But I think initially Jerry Dipoto, before spring training, hoped that Mitch Haniger was going to come back healthy. I, I guess that, what are you going to do with dead money anyways? But in my opinion, it should have freed up the roster spot a lot sooner. I know it's hard with Mitch Haniger. He's a beloved franchise player, the word that I've used over and over in this episode of Bleav in Mariners. But I think it would have been much easier for them to free up a roster spot sooner coming into spring training with an idea of what they could do without having to worry about keeping versatility on the roster kind of locked. Because now, without Haniger, Rowdy Tellez, of course, making the roster as the opening day first baseman, designated hitter, wherever you want to put him. And then Miles Mastrobuoni, he's going to be on the roster as well as a utility guy. I don't know, maybe they could have gotten somebody else. Like, they've already got a utility guy in Dylan Moore. I know the Mariners at times have liked to carry two at the same time with Moore and like a Sam Haggerty, but like, isn't that kind of what Miles Mastrobuoni is for Seattle at this point? Like a Sam Haggerty? We've already had this in Seattle. Two utility guys on the roster at one time. Maybe, Hags was on there because Dylan Moore was having to start a little bit more than the Mariners wanted him to, or maybe than he should have. But I just think that instead of like settling for like another utility guy, they could have done this a little bit sooner in the offseason, or maybe even into the last season when it was clear that he wasn't actually producing, and could have gotten somebody much better to replace him on the roster. And unfortunately, I just don't think the trade in the first place for Mitch Haniger was a good one. I think Jerry Dipoto made a huge misstep and kind of hamstrung the future of the franchise. Now, as far as Mitch Haniger being a good or a great player, I love to take a look at Baseball Reference when people ask the question or have the argument. I saw a tweet. It was Mariners announcer Angie Mentink, and I love Angie. I've been watching her since I was a kid. I love her takes on baseball. Love that she's in the booth now as a color analyst for the Mariners this year. But she was basically getting some crap because she called Mitch Haniger a great player. Now, I understand the pushback actually a little bit. She came to the defense of her statement pretty quickly, pointing out that Mitch Haniger did get 11th in MVP voting. He was an all-star, helped lead the Mariners back to the playoffs, had a couple of really good seasons for Seattle, leads the franchise with 8 walk-offs all time. Like, there are a lot of good things that Mitch Haniger's done, but does that make him a great player? I mean, a one-time all-star? Do you consider that a great player in baseball history? I mean, I'm just trying to be objective here. I'm not trying to be mean. You look at the guy that played, 7.5 seasons, essentially 8 seasons minus the COVID year. He made the all-star team once. He got MVP votes a couple of times. I would say that translates more to a good player, maybe not a great player. And I'm pretty sure Baseball Reference actually agrees with me. Now, it's interesting. I do think Mitch Haniger had the potential to be a great player. Unfortunately, he was just dogged by injuries. I mean, he did have like 6.5 WAR in that career year in, I think it was 2018. And then in 2021, had almost 4 WAR as well. The guy can hit, and the guy provides value to you when he's on the field. And because of that, you look at similar batters. Anthony Santander is in there as far as similar batter score goes, Byron Buxton. But then you look also on the list of similar batters according to Baseball Reference. You've got Baltimore Orioles star from the 90s and 2000s, well, more so the 2000s, Jay Gibbons, and then Trey Mancini, who also, played very well at times, dealt with a horrible cancer diagnosis, but was able to come back from that. But essentially a guy that had potential to be a really great player, had a few good seasons in Major League Baseball, but beyond that, wasn't really able to find that success. And a lot of guys, it's either, just because baseball is such a game of adjustments, they not necessarily can't make that next adjustment. Or in Mitch Haniger's case, it's just health, it's injuries. And Mitch Haniger could not stay out of the training room. And because of that, you look at similar batters through the age of 33, 34 that Baseball Reference compares him with. I don't see any great names on this list, guys. I see good names. I see Mark Canha at the top of it. I see Orioles legend Jay Gibbons, who had a few really good seasons for the Orioles. 23 home runs, 100 RBIs in his 26 age season in 2003, hit like 277. And another good season before that, 28 home runs. A couple years later, had a 26 home run season. Hit about 127 home runs and 427 RBIs over 9 years, a 260 batting average. Yeah, pretty comparable to Mitch Haniger, right? You look a little bit further down the list, Tommy Pham sits there. comparable to Mitch Haniger? Well, you look at the numbers. I think initially you would say no, but actually, yes. Mitch Haniger, 20 some, 30 some home run seasons. Tommy Pham's had a 23 home run season. He's had a 21 home run season. He's had 70 plus RBIs once. He's had 60 plus RBIs at least 4 or 5 times. I know that Tommy Pham necessarily may not be the most likable major league player, but hey, guess what? He also got MVP votes in 2017 when he was with the St. Louis Cardinals. Does that make him a great player? I think you see where I'm going with this argument here. Unfortunately, I love me some Mitch Haniger. I think that he was a Mariners legend, but he is just a good player, not a great player. All right. You look at his stats, you look at what he did compared to other teams. I just don't think you can call him a great Major League Baseball player. You can call him great for the Mariners, but if you look at other franchises that you're trying to be more like, you're trying to be a winning franchise, I don't think he'd be a great player. Even on like the St. Louis Cardinals, I think he's a good player. Unfortunately, he's definitely not a great player on a team like the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Red Sox. The Texas Rangers, does that qualify him to be a great player? I would say not. I'd say Seattle's years of irrelevancy have unfortunately shaded glasses a little bit of Mariners fans and just kind of made us look at these good players, maybe even really good at times, and say those are great players. But unfortunately, I love Mitch Haniger. I love what he did in Seattle. I just don't think he was a great player. I'd say he's good, and he could have been great if it weren't for all those injuries, but he never got to that level of great. But yeah, those clutch moments he provided for the Mariners, couple very good seasons on top of that. I am going to miss Mitch Haniger, but he was good, not great. And that's my story about Mitch Haniger, and I'm sticking to it. All right, we got to wrap up this episode of Bleav in Mariners here pretty soon, but really quickly, with the move of Mitch Haniger getting released by the Mariners, actually, there were a couple of other moves made as well. Ryan Divish for the Seattle Times pointing this out, essentially saying that Ryan Bliss making the roster with the send down of Leo Rivas. So that's awesome. Congrats to Ryan Bliss. Leo Rivas getting sent down as well as a couple of veteran pitchers that did not make the bullpen. Jesse Hahn and Drew Pomeranz asking for their release. Guess what? That means that Carlos Vargas fills the roster spot for Seattle in the bullpen that we've been talking about all season. It makes sense. He's out of minor league options, and the Mariners, I think, are it's a good time to give him a chance. They've been looking at him, obviously, since he came over in a Diamondbacks trade, but never really given him a shot yet. But this is the time with Matt Brash down. Although good news about Matt Brash, he is actually throwing. It's the final day of spring training as I'm taping this episode, and he is throwing bullpens. So after coming back from Tommy John surgery, just as we end spring training, seeing Matt Brash throwing bullpens, it's gonna be nice to see him at the back end of the bullpen soon. And not sure. Hopefully Carlos Vargas can find success, but not sure how long he's going to be on the roster if Matt Brash can actually get back quick. But once again, with that opportunity with Matt Brash down for Carlos Vargas, maybe he can make something. It's a good time for the Mariners to give a look at the kid. He's a young, hard thrower, and with no options remaining, essentially kind of forces the Mariners' hand a little bit too. So we'll see what Carlos Vargas can do with that final bullpen spot. And with Mitch Haniger getting released, with Leo Rivas getting sent down, that means Ryan Bliss is the second baseman for the Seattle Mariners. At least that's what it looks like. You could still say Dylan Moore's that possibility, the possible second baseman, but most likely going to be playing that utility role off the bench. Bliss going to be starting, batting probably 8th or 9th in the lineup. Rowdy Tellez making the roster essentially a guarantee because Mitch Haniger released on the day of Rowdy Tellez's opt-out. That was not a coincidence. He had a couple of opt-outs in his contract. Rowdy Tellez, the first one was set for Sunday, March 23rd. That is the date that they released Mitch Haniger, and I'm assuming went to Rowdy and told him, hey, congrats, big boy, you are on the roster. So with that, Rowdy's going to be the first baseman. That means with Haniger not on the bench, you essentially now have Mitch Garver on the bench. You've got Dylan Moore on the bench. You've got Donovan Solano on the bench. And that last spot that was going to go to Haniger is now going to go to Miles Mastrobuoni. He hit his booty off in spring training. I made the point on the last episode of Bleav in Mariners, that he's a good spring training hitter. He's not really a great regular season hitter, but we'll see if that translates from a great spring into a good season with the Mariners. I don't think it is, but his versatility is something, and some speed off the bench that they could really use. And that seems to be the end of this episode of Bleav In Mariners. I'm pretty much up against it time-wise. Appreciate everybody tuning in. I know everybody's sad about losing Mitch Haniger, but trust me, I think it's the better move going forward, and it's a move that they should have made a long time ago. And it's a move that gives them much more versatility off the bench with the Mastrobuoni. And hey, it opens up the opportunity for Mitch Garver, basically not fighting for at-bats with the other half of the now thrown in the trash Mitch, which he can get all those extra bats at DH if he's hitting his booty off, and then makes the Mariners roster decision kind of harder come like May, June, because then they might have to grab Blake Hunt, backup catcher, bring him up from AAA off the 40-man roster just to back Cal Raleigh up, because if Mitch Garver's hitting, they probably don't want him backing up Cal Raleigh. So, hey, there could be some more hard decisions for the Mariners coming up. What do you think this does for Seattle's roster? Are you a fan of the move of Seattle releasing Mitch Haniger? Let me know in the comments on this YouTube video below, and on X, on the Air Jordan with an O. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We are just a couple of days away from the start of the regular season for the 2025 Seattle Mariners. I'll be at T-Mobile Park on opening day. Hope to see you there. I'll have an episode the day before talking about some activities that I'm sure will be so exciting going on around the stadium before opening day, and what everybody will be doing, and hopefully reach out to the community a little bit while I am there. Appreciate everybody, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of Bleav In Mariners. Keep those tridents up, Mariners fans. See you soon.